Hi there, I'm Laura Domela from Slowboat.com.
And I'm Sam Landsman from Slowboat.com. Today we're going to talk about how to get north of Desolation Sound, so the various routes through the rapids and Johnstone Strait that you'll have to transit to get from Desolation Sound to the Broughtons and points further north.
Okay, and these gates are significant and they are obstacles for a lot of cruisers.
Yeah, that's right. They are something that has to be dealt with. They're not something to be feared, but they definitely need to be respected. The rapids are fast-flowing and quite turbulent, some of them. They can capsize boats or certainly cause a lot of discomfort to those on board, and slower boats simply can't make progress against them. Some of the rapids flow to 18 knots or so and have a lot of power behind them.
But they are predictable.
Yep.
So if you know what day you're going to be transiting the rapid, all you need to do is have a good tide table and be able to look up the time of slack.
Exactly. And they're calm 4 times per day. And when they're calm, there's no big deal whatsoever. You can go through and not even know it's a rapid. It's just a narrower section of the waterway.
And then there's Johnstone Strait. There's the rapids, most of the back way, and then there's Johnstone Strait.
Yeah, and Johnstone Strait is much less predictable. There's really a weather issue there. The wind tends to funnel through Johnstone Strait, so it's not uncommon to have a summer afternoon 25 to 35 knots of wind from the northwest, but oftentimes in the morning it's calm and it's no big deal to get through the short distance that you have to make in order to be in sheltered water again.
Even if you go the back way where you're the least exposed to Johnstone Strait, you're only in Johnstone Strait then for about 12 miles.
Yeah. There are a couple of primary routes, and we're going to talk more extensively about 2 of these routes, what I call the highway route, which is the fastest way, or at least the most direct, not necessarily the fastest depending on the conditions, but it's the most direct. You go through from Campbell River up through Seymour Narrows and then into Johnstone Strait. And you're in Johnstone Strait for about 50 miles. You only have 1 rapid that you have to negotiate, but the downside to this route is that you are exposed in Johnstone Strait for its entirety. Now there are duck out points, we'll talk a little bit more about that. The other option is what I call the back way, and it's the most protected route to get north of Desolation Sound, but you have to negotiate 5 different tidal rapids to get through this area.
But it's quite protected.
Yep, it's protected, it's beautiful, they're nice places to spend the night, but it requires careful timing to get through the rapids. The benefit to this is primarily that you're only out in Johnstone Strait for 12 nautical miles as opposed to 50-something with the highway route.
The highway. Then also, there's some other options along in the backway area. You can go back onto the east side of Quadra Island through Hole in the Wall. We've done that a couple times. So there's a lot of varieties with the backway.
Yeah, and you can really mix and match however you need to make the things work for the conditions that you're facing.
So where you want to go.
Yeah, you could come out of Blind Channel, for instance. If you're on a northbound trip, you might come through the first 3 rapids, Yucatán, Gillard, and Dent, and then overnight somewhere, and then pop out at Blind Channel the next day and avoid having to go through Whirlpool and Green Point. But there are really tons of options here. We're just going to talk about the 2 options on the extreme ends, then you can mix and match as needed to make your transit as easy as possible.
So let's talk about the highway first.
The first obstacle on the highway route is Seymour Narrows, and Seymour has currents that run to about 18 knots. It's just north of Campbell River, which is easy for timing because you can just tie up in Campbell River or April Point and you can wait to leave until you...
Groceries.
Yeah, you can do all that. There's not a lot of distance that you have to cover to get to the rapid. So the timing is pretty easy and there's only 1 of them. So you don't have to get through a whole set of them with timing that is maybe conducive to your travel plans or maybe not.
And with the highway, you're going to be, as Sam said before, about 50 miles in Johnstone Strait.
Right. And Johnstone Strait has strong currents too. The currents can run to about 6 knots in places. Most of us have boats that are not so fast that we beat into a 6-knot current for hours on end. So you can really speed up your trip or slow it down by timing it well or incorrectly. I've had trips down Johnstone Strait where I've had average speeds in the 10 or 11 knot range, even though I'm at an 8-knot throttle setting. I've seen speeds as high as 14 knots going through the strait at times. But I've also had the flip side of that where it seems like you're standing still and you're just pouring on the coals,
when are we gonna
burning
get there?
Fuel and making very slow progress.
Also, Johnstone floods southeast and ebbs northwest.
If you're heading northbound, it's nice to do it on the ebb, and then you have that ebb pushing you along. The downside to this is if you have a northwesterly wind and an ebb, you can get really confused seas. We're going to talk more later on about the Johnstone Strait weather, but wind against current really kicks up nasty seas in Johnstone.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the back way going through the rapids. Yucatán is the first one.
Correct. On a northbound trip, you're going to arrive at Yucatán first. But there are 3 rapids in close succession here. There's Yucatán, and then Gillard Gillard Passage, and then Dent Rapids.
And Dent's the one you want to arrive at Slack, for sure.
And the challenge here is if you wait till Slack at Ukalta, Dent will have already turned 20, 30 minutes beforehand.
Between the time you're at Ukalta till you get to Dent is about 30 minutes?
Yeah, it's about 3 miles to get through all of the rapids.
Okay.
So the bottom line is you can't get all of them on a northbound trip. You can't hit all of them on one tidal exchange at perfect time.
Right.
So you end up having to go through a little bit early at Ukalta and Gillard.
But that's okay.
Yep, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
How was your first trip through?
It was like nothing. You would never know we were going through a rapid, even though
and
Ukalta and Gillard, you could see a little bit of turn because we were early, so you could see a little bit of surface, not boiling, but surface movement. But when we got to Dent, it was just perfectly calm, and it was great.
Yeah, here's a video that I shot last summer when I was heading through Ukalta, and you can see there's just a little bit of disturbance in the water, but this was about, I think, 40 minutes or so, 30 or 40 minutes before Slack at Ukalta on a pretty big tidal exchange, and you can see the water's just not all that disturbed, certainly not anything that would present a hazard for a well-found boat. And then here's another video showing Gillard, and you can see the same kind of thing. There's just a little bit of boiling kind of look there, but nothing that would be hazardous to a well-found boat.
It's also nice to watch because usually you'll arrive and there will be a lot of other boats waiting, and you can watch the first few boats go through and see if the current is turning them or doing anything weird. If you're a little afraid, it's kind of nice to wait for another boat.
I tell people that you should really aim to get to Dent right at Slack, and you're going to be just fine. You're going to be a little bit early through Gillard and Ukalta, but you'll get through just fine. And then the other thing to keep in mind is right after Ukalta, but before Gillard, is a place called Stewart Island Community Dock, and that's a public marina. And if you are coming through and timing has gotten off, you've just come through Ukalta and it's been too difficult or too strong a current, you can tie up and wait there. But do be mindful that there can be quite a bit of current at the dock, so you should be aware of that when you're making a landing.
Right. Okay, and then what about Greenpoint Rapids and Whirlpool Rapids?
So you're going to go through the 3 rapids, Ukalta, Gillard, and Dent, and then you're in a section that's about 14, 15 miles before the next rapid. On a northbound trip, you won't be able to hit all of these on one tidal exchange, so you'll probably need to spend the night somewhere in that area, and there are a few good options. There's Shoal Bay, which is a public facility, a public dock. There's no power, but it's just a pleasant spot.
There's a gorgeous view. When it's clear, there's a gorgeous view.
Yeah, the view up Phillips Arm is breathtaking. There's a nice hike that you can take up to an old mine. I enjoy Shoal Bay.
I do too.
There's also Blind Channel Resort, which is higher end and very nice. The Richter family takes good care of it and takes good care of their guests. And then from there, you're going to jump right into Greenpoint Rapids. And Greenpoint Rapids, it's not quite as important to hit it at Slack as the others have been, because it's a more laminar flow. It's pretty much smooth flowing. You don't get the big whirlpools and overfalls that you get in Dent and Ukalta. So here's a video showing me coming through Greenpoint Rapids, and this was actually with about 7 knots of current going with me. So I was on a northbound trip, so there was a 7-knot ebb, and you can see there's some turbulence spun off of the island there.
But not bad.
No, and it really was not a hazardous trip through there. It did not feel like it was difficult or dangerous or anything like that.
And again, with this backway, after you go through all the rapids, you've got about 12 miles in Johnstone Strait before you get to the Broughtons.
Right, and you can duck into Port Neville if the weather's deteriorating, or if the weather's okay, you can keep going and hop into the Broughtons at Havana Channel. You're right at Port Harvey Marina there, a good stop.
Yeah.
And then you can continue into the Broughtons, and it's all protected water cruising from there.
So how do you determine when is the right time to go through? What resources can people look at?
Great question. And this is the key to unlocking the rapids.
Yes.
Is figuring out when Slack is and being confident in those predictions. The official publication for this, published by Canadian Hydrographic Services, the Tide and Current Tables, Volume 6. And this is not adjusted for daylight savings time. So that's really important. You have to manually adjust the times. You don't want to be an hour off coming through these rapids.
Right. And we use ports and passes because it is adjusted for daylight savings time. So you don't have another hour you have to build in or take off or whatever. Add another math problem to another math problem to another math problem.
Yeah, Ports and Passes is the book that I prefer too.
Yeah.
It covers the entire inside passage from Olympia up to Glacier Bay and Skagway. They buy all the data from Canadian Hydrographic Services, so it's the same data as you'd get in the CHS book, and it's got a nice spiral binding. It's
well
easier
organized.
to use. It lays flat and open.
Yeah.
Much better in my opinion than the the CHS tables. And if you buy all 3 of the CHS tables, it costs about the same as the copy of Ports and Passes, which covers the entire area.
A lot of people's chart plotters have this information on them as well, but we found a couple times that it wasn't correct.
That's been my experience too. In a lot of areas, it doesn't matter that much, but in
Some
Dent
areas,
and Gillard and Yucatan, it matters critically. You need to be there at slack, and so it's a useful tool, but don't rely on it. Don't bet your safety on somebody's calculation that has not been verified by any of the official agencies that are responsible for creating this data.
Also, I really like Kevin Monahan's local knowledge. It's got a lot more education about the spots, not just the time of slack, but it's got a lot of information if you want to actually learn more about why these areas, what the difference between laminar flow and...
It has a lot of that kind of information. It also has really good diagrams showing the trouble spots in Johnstone Strait and where you can ride a back eddy if you're going against the current. Kevin Monahan has been a lifetime on the coast. He's been up and down the Inside Passage hundreds, if not more than that times, and he's documented this pretty carefully, and it's a great resource. It's a pretty inexpensive book, and I think it's another resource that you should have on board your boat.
Also, we like to arrive 30 minutes early or so and binoc the area and see what the current's doing, look at the rocks. And
yeah, that's advice that I always give to people is arrive early. You can always throttle back and wait and drift around. And
usually there will be other boats doing the same thing.
If you're coming through in the summer, there are going to be other boats around. If you're the only person there, and
really triple check your timing.
Yeah, you might be
you
wrong.
might be wrong.
And if you see any white water when you're looking through in your binoculars, then you've done something wrong with the timing, and you shouldn't be seeing white water. That's a sign of very swift moving water.
Yeah, and if you get it wrong, just hang out, go do something else.
Yeah, there are places to wait. There are places to wait all throughout this area, and it's just not worth risking your safety or your happiness, whoever's on board with you. You don't want to scare anybody. You don't want to scare yourself. You don't want to hurt yourself or your boat or anybody else. So if you're a thrill seeker and you want to go and see what this looks like when it's really running, you can pull into Dent Island Lodge. It's a little spendy. It's about $4.75 a foot a night for moorage, but they will take you out on a jet boat for an additional fee.
I would like to do that.
And they'll take you out at maximum at Dent Rapids, and you can go look at it and see just how powerful this water is.
Or you can search for it on YouTube. There are also videos on YouTube. I've done that.
That is the less expensive option.
All right, so do you want to go through and tell people how to calculate when slack is, especially on some of these stations that aren't primary stations?
A lot of people find it difficult to use the Ports and Passes or the CHS tables book, and it's easy to look up something that has the
main entry.
Yeah, that's a primary. So the primary station will have pages and they'll show you the specific times of slack and maximum velocities and so forth. But then there's secondary stations that you have to do some calculations. So they're based off of a primary, and then you do a little arithmetic. Depending on if it's a turn to flood or a turn to ebb, you add or subtract a predetermined amount of time.
Right. So like Gillard Passage will be listed because it's primary, but Yucatan and Dent, it'll say referenced off Gillard Passage. So, and it'll say plus or minus amount of minutes.
Right. And so the first thing you need to do is determine what the primary is. In this case, it's Gillard. And then you're going to need to figure out the timing for Yucatan and Dent as well. The next thing to do is to find out if it's a turn to ebb or a turn to flood that you're going on. The way to determine that, you'll look in the column and there's a column that says SLK, that's slack.
Okay, well, let's just look.
Yeah,
let's just do an example here.
So here we go. This is July 4th, 2016 example, and we determine here that slack is at 11:01. And if you look over to the right from 11:01, you can see that the next column...
that column is flood or ebb.
So you can see that the maximum velocity is at 2:26 p.m., and that's a 10.7 knot flood. That plus on the right column means that's a flood, a minus means an ebb. So that means the 11:01 is a turn to flood. The next slack at 5:58 is a turn to ebb, because you go over there 9 o'clock p.m. then is -7, which is a 7 knot ebb. So then if we want to calculate this time of slack at
Yucatan,
we just go and look at the secondary current stations in British Columbia, and you can see that right here. And Yucatan, on a turn to flood, you add 25 minutes to the time at Gillard. So 11:01 plus 25 minutes is 11:26. Dent is minus 15 minutes, so that means that the turn at Dent is 15 minutes before
Gillard.
And so that's going to be at 10:46 in the morning. And so you can see here, you're going to be going through Yucatan first, but that slack is last. And so that's why when we talk about navigating through these rapids, you're going to have to go through Yucatan when it's still running with some current, and then you can go through Gillard when it's a little bit less current, and Dent right at slack.
And Gillard's the one in the middle, which is probably why it's primary, right? How do they determine what's primary or not?
I have no idea.
I wondered that too. Yeah, it's like, why is that one primary?
There's a few miles that you have to traverse between these rapids, and so you need to build in time for that. But
gun it.
In most boats, it works out just perfectly if you aim to get to Dent at slack, or maybe just a few minutes after slack. The timing at Gillard and Yucatán just works out.
It's doable. It works. Don't be too afraid. Just make sure you do your math a couple times.
And don't be afraid to talk with other boaters, either on the radio as you're milling about. It's pretty typical to have several boats waiting to go through, and you can chat on the radio to compare your timing. And the other thing about this is don't assume that the other person knows something you don't.
Right.
I've seen boats going through where I've heard multiple people discussing on the radio, and they were both wrong. And so you don't want to just blindly follow somebody else thinking that they know better than you do. Understand how to do these calculations, then have faith that you're doing them correctly. But don't be afraid to bounce ideas off of other cruisers.
Great advice, yeah.
If you click the link on the screen right now, you'll be redirected to our website, slowboat.com, where we have a form that you can use that makes it easy to fill in the blanks, basically, and calculate the time that you need to leave, the time that you'll get to each of these, all the calculations and so forth. We've gotten through the rapids at this point, but you still have to get through Johnstone Strait, right? This information is applicable if you're in Johnstone Strait for 12 miles or 20 miles or 50 miles. And the general summer pattern is for calmer mornings. That's true throughout this part of the world. But it's also pretty typical for a pretty boisterous northwesterly to develop throughout the day. So you end up by the afternoon or evening a 25 to 35 knot northwesterly. And that's not a pleasant time to be out in Johnstone Strait. So,
well, and you see that forecast frequently, even though it doesn't always happen.
Right. I've seen it for weeks at a time where it's wind light or wind 10 to 15 knots building to northwest 25 to 35 in the afternoon. And I've had really pleasant, glassy even trips down the strait. Like this video here was heading up Johnstone Strait last summer, perfectly calm, no big deal whatsoever. They were calling for pretty gusty conditions, I think 20 to 30 that afternoon. So just because you see 25 to 35 knots in the forecast doesn't mean you shouldn't go. You need to certainly take it under advisement and probably be out there early. But if you never go when it says building to 25 to 35, you might never go. It's like the Environment Canada forecaster puts the same forecast in and then goes on vacation. And it just sits there all summer for wind 10 to 15, building to northwest 25 to 35 in the afternoon. The other thing, like we mentioned before, is the currents run to about 6 knots in places. Use that Monahan's Local Knowledge book. That's a great resource to figure out the specific places that can kick up and be nasty. And you really need to be aware of the wind against current. If you're riding the ebb up on a summer afternoon and you get a big northwesterly, you're going to have a pretty bumpy ride. One of the nice things about Johnstone Strait is typically the wind is going to be either in front of you or behind you. It's not going to be coming from the side. You're not going to have beam seas in most cases. And most boats are a lot more comfortable in a head sea or a following sea than they are in a beam sea. The final thing about Johnstone Strait is to be careful at Robson Bight. It's not something that fouls up most cruisers by any means, but there is a restricted area that extends out a half-mile offshore near Robson Bight. This is on the charts. You can see a crude representation here, but that's an orca whale protected area, and you just need to stay a half-mile offshore. So what are you looking at in terms of weather when you're coming up Johnstone Strait, Laura?
Well, we always look at Environment Canada's, just what we were talking about, the summer forecast. Also, we look at Chatham Point Light Station and the Fanny Island Weather Station.
I do the same. We're just trying to build a picture of what's happening on the strait. They're calling for the high winds. Are these winds being observed at Chatham Point and at Fanny Island? And if not, do I have time to sneak out there, do the 12-mile trip out in Johnstone Strait and get back in while it's still calm? So
let's talk about what we look for when we're going to do this transition through Johnstone Strait. We always check the Environment Canada, the summer forecast, that's always the same. What else?
Yeah, and that forecast, personally, I'm not too concerned about it if it's building forecast, because it's probably going to be fine in the morning. If they say it's going to be 10 to 15 in the morning, building to 25 to 35, I'm then looking for the Chatham Point Light Station, the Fanny Island Weather Station, what they're actually showing in the morning when I wake up. And so I'm looking for something under 3-foot moderate. I'll go in 3-foot moderate. It's going to be a little bit bumpy, a little bit wet at that point, especially if I'm going into it. Typically, I want less than 20 knots of headwind. I'll do a little bit more if it's coming from behind, about 25 knots. And that's about it. The key here is to be confident enough to move decisively when the weather is decent.
And know when to not go, or when to duck out.
You don't need to be afraid of this place, but you do need to respect it.
Right.
Well, thanks for listening. If you have any questions, just let us know in the comments below or contact us through slowboat.com.
And thanks for joining us. To see more of our educational boating videos, subscribe to our Slowboat YouTube channel. If you're on Facebook, you can follow us at facebook.com/slowboatlife. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at Slowboat Life. And of course, you can always find us on slowboat.com. Until next time, see you on the water.